All right, guys, welcome back to another edition of Better Fishing with Two Bald Biologists. There's Ben.
It's a brand new year.
It is a brand new day.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year to everyone. It's now January. Look forward to a lot of great topics this year. This year, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, and today is very different. We've had a lot of questions about it, so we thought we'd do a podcast on it.
And if hearing us wasn't annoying enough, now you can see us.
Now you can see us. So for all of you listening, as you normally do, if you would like to see us, you can go to our YouTube channel. Can't even get that out. Go to our YouTube channel and look up the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and we will now have videos. We're working on some different things with the videos, but this is a trial run for January, so hopefully it goes well.
Yeah. And so maybe we'll be able to show y'all some things in the future, but right now if you ever wondered how bald we really were,
and how ugly we really are,
here you go.
Here it is. Yeah, the one thing I'd say about the YouTube channel is we're basically not planning to edit a whole lot of it. So there'll be a lot of ahs and ums and all that kind of stuff that gets edited out of our regular podcast. So it'll be a little different, sound a little different, but
Bald Biologist uncut.
It's uncut Bald Biologist, exactly. So we'll go with that for now. But today's topic, Ben, and it's just Ben and I today, which maybe that's good or bad. We'll find that out as we go along. But
it's the holidays. It's hard to recruit somebody.
It's hard to recruit, for sure. But today's topic is natural disasters. What happens during a natural disaster? What happens to the animals in a natural disaster? As many of you know, and probably know someone who's been affected by it. We had Hurricane Helene come through back in late September. And, we've had a lot of questions given to us by people that listen to the podcast is what happens to trout? What happens to this? What happens to that? And so we're going to talk about the fish and the aquatic animals and the effects that happens during a hurricane. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today, and we'll do our basic questions, and we'll have a winner and all that good jazz in this podcast.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, hurricanes are kind of tough business. We've traditionally have them at the coast.
Yeah.
And they're bad there, but in the mountains they're just a different kind of bad. It's not a competition, but
it's not one you want to win.
It's definitely not one you want to win, but it's a different beast altogether in how they impact these areas. So. Yeah,
so maybe we'll start there. Traditionally most people in North Carolina are very accustomed to hurricanes happening along our coast, or at least from the Piedmont east. Not a lot going on in the mountains. I mean, they do get some tropical systems come up through the Appalachians historically. It's happened in the past, but not at this level, at least not in recent history. But on the coast, what we typically get is obviously a lot of wind, but we get a lot of rainfall. We get the flooding that happens.
Storm surge
can happen right along the coast. And all of those things affect animals. Generally, what affects our animals the most during hurricanes on the coast is inland flooding. This long, drawn-out flooding process that occurs. It starts from the Piedmont, and as the water pushes east and gets up in the swamps and that kind of stuff, we get this massive flooding event. I think of hurricanes like Floyd in '99. We had some ice storms.
Isabel, Irene.
I don't remember their years, but I remember Floyd particularly because it flooded my grandparents out of their home.
Right.
In '99. And then more recently, we've had Florence and Matthew along the coast that were flooding events. And you just get this massive amount of water. Generally, it's a hurricane that moves pretty slow. Get a lot of water over a short period of time, and then you get this big flood event, big flood pulse that comes from basically the Piedmont down through the coastal plain and floods the swamps and all that good jazz. And what kind of problems does that cause, Ben?
So, once the swamps get inundated with water, it takes, and the problem is it takes a couple days for the swamps to get inundated, and then it takes a couple days to a week for those swamps to start draining out again. And while the water sits in those swamps, all the oxygen, all that rotten material, leaf matter, rotten trees, old vegetation, all that stuff that's been sitting in that swamp for years upon years is now in the water, and it finally gets oxygen, so it starts to rot even more, and it just sucks all the oxygen out of the water. And so then when that water leaves the swamp, it's in the rivers, and
it causes problems.
It causes a lot of problems. We in Florence, and I think in Irene, we saw low DOs, especially in Irene, for almost a week. 10 days, zero oxygen. And we've talked about how fish need water, and that's true, but fish also need oxygen.
Yeah.
And if you tried to hold your breath for 14 days, it might be a little bit troublesome. So, and fish always seem to eke it out. Some, not all of them, because I'm sure many of you remember the pictures of I-40 and dead fish on it after, I think it was Matthew.
That was Matthew. Yeah.
But
that was on the Cape Fear.
If there's always a place where the oxygen doesn't get as bad, and there's always some fish that kind of eke it out, even though it's incredibly surprising to us as biologists who were out there monitoring the situation. But there's always fish that make it through a hurricane. They've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it's a reset to our system. It's not, granted, hurricanes, I'm not going to stand in line for one at all.
Nobody wants it.
They cause a lot of damage, a lot of impacts, but there are some benefits, afterwards in the fish community, because it makes growth rates astronomical. It kind of keeps the system dynamic. So it's not all bad, even though with a hurricane, it's mostly bad. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So.
And so, so that's kind of the coastal plain, what happens in the coastal plain. But what we have seen this time with Helene in the mountains is, once again, a lot of water in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more wind than probably a lot of the mountains is used to. And, just from a science nerd perspective, I'll nerd out a little bit. There's a couple of things that go on in the mountains. You got elevation, so you got elevation change. You got steep inclines that rush water into a system, and it funnels the water into these valleys, and so it picks up a tremendous amount of speed. And that's the difference between a coastal plain flood and a mountain flood when it comes to hurricanes. And we got this tremendous amount of speed, and it just literally, by the time it got to some of these lower valley rivers, like you think of the Cane River, the Toe, the North Toe, the South Toe, and then all that flows to the Nolichucky. You think of the Swannanoa, you think of some parts of the Catawba, and there's other rivers I'm missing. There's down near Broad River, down near Chimney Rock, and all that. And it picked up so much speed and so much water at that point that it's just a tremendous force that I say we because he and I both live in the coast, or have lived in the coastal plain, and coastal plain is really my home when I think about it. It can't beat it out of me for some reason, even though I don't live there now. But we don't experience that in the coastal plain.
No, it's a different beast.
It's a different beast. It's a slow, methodical flood. And it ruins houses, and it does tremendous amounts of damage, but it is not this dramatic, rapid force coming down a valley that happens within a 24 to 48 hour period, and it's over in the mountains. At least the flooding part is over in the mountains in a fairly short period of time. And
so it's just so much more violent.
It's just so much more violent. Mm-hmm. And so that I think, I don't think we as residents were ready for it. We just really weren't prepared. We hadn't seen it,
Yeah.
and we didn't know we were going to get that kind of water. And then on top of that, they got a lot of wind. By the time that storm made it to the mountains of North Carolina, it was in the 60 mile per hour, 70 mile per hour wind range, maximum sustained winds. But you put that in those hills, and you put that in those valleys, it just funnels that wind and it speeds it up. And the higher up the elevation you go, the less friction there is, and there's even more wind up there. I think I heard sustained winds at Mount Mitchell was 108, with gusts to 130. That's a lot of wind. And if you go up to the mountains, I've been multiple times looking at facilities that we own you'll see a tremendous amount of tree damage.
Sure.
Not only do you see the flood damage, you see a tremendous amount of tree damage. And so, it was a significant storm. And so we have gotten a lot of calls or emails really about what happens to those animals when all of this occurs. And you kind of mentioned a little bit about, what happens in the coastal plain. And some very similar things are going on in the mountains right now. You're going to have fish. One, it's probably been 100+ years since we've seen a flood like this in North Carolina in the mountains. And so I think the 1916 flood is the last one that was of this magnitude, and it's not even this magnitude. This is a magnitude greater. And so there are some things we don't know because we don't have the science to back it up yet because we haven't seen it, we haven't witnessed it. So I'll say that up front. But one of the things we do know is that one, when it comes to fish and mussels and crayfish and that, they're all aquatic. All those aquatic organisms, one, they're aquatic, so they know how to live in water.
Comes with the territory.
Not to be stupid, but they know how to live in water. And on top of that, a lot of people think, well, they're just gone. And I can tell you that I was up there a week and a half after the storm had happened, and I'm walking in places that were new streams.
Brand new
streams. They weren't a stream, now they are a stream.
They are not on the trout map yet.
They are not on the trout map, but they might be soon.
Right.
And I'm not laughing. It's just a weird sensation to go up there and, creek was over here, now the creek's 200 yards
100
over.
feet or more.
Yeah, the channels have completely changed how they look and where they are. And there were trout in them. And literally there was pools that had never existed before that existed then, and you look down in the pools and there's 10, 15 trout in them hanging out.
So it's interesting, because we see that in the coast too. There's definitely fish that move. There's fish that show up in places that won't, and so for the next year or so you may catch some random trout in places that you did not expect to catch trout because they got washed downstream. But a lot of those fish hid behind a rock, hid behind a boulder, hid in a deep hole, and just kind of eked it out. And, now that the waters rescinded, they're right back to where they are. And it's crazy to think, on the coast, I remember after one of the big storms, we were on the Trent River, and it looked like snow, but it was actually just sand, everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, in these mountains, it's like all the rocks just got polished. Like it was that violent and it just churned up that water. And so now there's just clean rocks everywhere, clean stumps, clean trees. And it's crazy to think that a fish can make it through that, but they do. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things that have happened to the animals. One, I think you said it, they get washed. There's animals that got washed downstream. They're in a totally different location. They're still in the same river basin, but they're somewhere else. They're not where they were prior to the storm. But there's new fish that wash down from up above into that spot. So it's kind of like they just replaced themselves somewhat. There's probably fish that did die because it was such a violent flood. There was probably fish that got caught way up in the woods somewhere, or got caught, got smashed. Because a lot of rocks were being smashed together and stuff like that. So there's probably some mortality, even though we have not personally witnessed that. Definitely probably happened. And then there's fish that just maintained right where they were. A lot of those mountain fish are very well adapted to high flowing systems. That's why they are where they are. And they typically can eke it out, like you said, eke it out behind a rock, behind a tree, behind a blowdown, something of that nature. Even though it looks like, and it is, a massive flood to us, and it is a violent force, there's a lot of pockets and eddies that occur during that flooding time that we don't see, that a fish knows. They can feel it, and they'll get behind it, and they'll just hang out, and they'll be like, yep, I'm good here until it gets better. And that's what happens on minor floods, not even major floods. That's what happens on minor floods. That's why when a minor flood happens, the stream doesn't get totally destroyed and there's no fish there.
Right. And I remember on the Roanoke after, I think it was Isabel or Irene, again, the ice storms.
The ice storms were bad up there.
We came to this, it was a eddy where two creeks met each other. And in that eddy, it was lower flow water. And there was apparently a little bit of oxygen there. And it was probably 3 or 4 dozen crappie just sitting there on the surface, just eking it out. And that's exactly what the trout did as well, you know. Yeah. I just don't have a good example where I actually saw it, you know, like I did those crappie.
Yeah, it's amazing how, and you mentioned it when you were talking about the coastal plain, and I think this very same thing is going to happen in the mountains. It is a reset. It's a natural reset that happens and occurs. You know, I've talked to the biologists that work up there. They all feel like within the next year to 2 years, we're going to have a pretty big spawn of stream fishes, particularly trout. Trout really like clean bottoms that have been pretty much scrubbed. And there's going to be a lot of places, even though there's a lot of debris and stuff right now, there's going to be a lot of places that the bottoms are going to be pretty clean, no silt. It's just going to be bedrock, or it's just going to be cobble or whatever. And trout love that. And so if it's not this fall, because it happened so quick, it happened right at the spawning time for a lot of our species, you know, it'll probably be next fall you'll see this kind of boom that happens in spawning. And we've seen that in the coastal plain.
You see it everywhere where the fish population is taking a hit like that. And what happens is either the fish that survive that very next spawn, like you said, if it's this fall or next fall, that very next spawn, one, will be prolific, and two, their growth rates will be insane. Yep. It's like the difference in going to a buffet of 11 versus at 12. You know, they'll have all the food.
We know our buffets.
Yes. That's why I don't go to them as much as I used to. But they're there. They have all the resources of the creek at their disposal. Yeah. And
a lot less competition. There's like I said, it's just a reset, and you get this big boom. We've talked about it on the podcast before when we talked about hurricanes. You know, one of the things that happened, I think, after Florence, I believe it was Florence. Florence was pretty significant on the Neuse River, along with other rivers. Sure. The Neuse River had a pretty significant fish kill because of it, and like the spring after, or really the kind of the summer fall after, my dad called me and he's like, "Man, I can't catch bluegill for all these filthy bass around here." Which you have to understand my dad. He's not a bass guy. And what he was talking about were these 4 to 6 to 8 inch bass that were just everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that's all because of that reset that happened in that time right after the hurricane. And I think you're probably going to see something very similar with trout in the mountains. I think you're also going to see that probably with smallmouth. There's probably going to be a reset there. You're going to probably see a lot of little smallmouth early on in the next year or two, and then it'll kind of pick itself back up, and there'll be bigger fish. And maybe those fish, like you said, will be tougher, tend to grow a little faster. And so you might actually 4 or 5, 6 years from now might have smallmouth that are quite a bit bigger than what we've been seeing in the past.
So the best example of that, and I'm not trying to compare the mountains to the coast.
Well, they're somewhat comparable.
But with right now, bass fishermen are riding a wave at the coast.
No hurricanes at the coast.
I mean, we've got some big bass fishing events that are coming to the coast next year.
That's right.
We had a big bass fishing event last year. Bass fishing is strong, and it is very strong right now. Primarily because there was a hurricane about 8 years ago.
Yep, had a hurricane and we hadn't had one since. Right. So we hadn't had the reset that brings.
But we've rode that wave. Now, if I mean, I'm not asking for a hurricane by any means, but we'll also see in the next probably 5 years, maybe that's going to start to curtail a little bit as well.
Exactly. If you don't get a hurricane in the next 5 to 10 years, that causes you're going to get a hurricane. But I mean, it's just
don't put that on me.
Well, no, you live on the coast, man. You're getting a hurricane. But we don't all. Not every hurricane is a massive flooding cause fish kill hurricane. I mean, we've had a lot of hurricanes that don't do that.
I would say it's probably closer to like 1 out of every 5 that we have that really has that kind of reset factor associated with it. Now there may be some isolated things that happen
in
a certain creek or somewhere like that. But as far as a landscape level hurricane event, which is what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Those are not every single storm. Thank goodness.
Yeah, and so you're gonna have that also in the mountains. You probably, storms are more frequent than they have been in the past.
It seems so.
It seems so anyway, and that some of that is climate change issues. Some of that is cyclical. If you look back to the 30s, we had a ton of hurricanes in the 30s. 30s were a very popular time for hurricanes, and that was almost 100 years ago. So there's cyclical things that happen with these tropical systems. But, we had Fred in 2021-ish, I think. So, 3 years ago we had Tropical Storm Fred that did damage kind of in that Brevard, Canton area. Did significant damage in that area. So, the mountains have had a couple of back-to-back, pretty recent years, but this was much more widespread.
Sure.
Quite a significant storm, but and
I'm not trying to downplay anybody who got impacted by hurricane.
No. Hopefully we go another 100 years was my point.
Yeah.
Hopefully we go another 100 years and we don't have this kind of storm again. But we don't know that. We'll figure that out as time goes on.
Yeah.
But I will say that what I have witnessed and seen, and I have friends that live there, live in the heart of it. It is significant. I have witnessed a lot of coastal hurricane events. I've been a part of them. I grew up in them. I saw Floyd and the massive amount of damage that Floyd did. I've seen Florence and Matthew and the amount of damage that they did. I've never seen anything like this. I'll just be honest with you. And a cousin of mine who works in emergency management, we talked over Thanksgiving, and he's like, I've never seen anything. He works in emergency management. Like, that's what he does. Right. And he's like, I've never witnessed anything like this ever before.
Yeah. When I went up and helped on the hatchery, I was on the very edge of the edge.
Yep.
And I still hadn't seen anything do anything quite like that.
Yeah, so. It is. So the reason I say that is we think we know what these animals are going to do, but we might not know. Because they might have been more significant than we thought. And so that leads to the question of, well, what are we going to do as an agency? What is the Wildlife Resource Commission going to do as an agency when it comes to animals and monitoring animals and all that? Well, I can tell you that our biologists are looking at a plan to, study, go back and look at streams, see what the mussel populations are. In fact, some of our staff have already done a little bit of that, just kind of preliminary ground truthing. These animals were here at one time. Are they still here? And then there's...
we do have some species that are very important, very low abundance.
We got threatened and endangered animals, particularly in the mussel world and the crayfish world, and some fishes. But really in that mussel world, we have quite a bit that are threatened and endangered in our mountain region and are quite isolated populations. And so, we'll see how those populations have done over time. And so we have staff that are out looking. They'll be looking over the next year to 2 years, because it's going to take a while to basically get to all of the mountains and figure it all out, because we only have but so many people.
Well, and the first thing we did was, are our people okay?
Yeah.
That took some doing.
That took some doing too, because communication was quite tough at times.
Before we can even get to the fish, we have to make sure our people and our equipment and our facilities and everything else are okay. Yeah. And then as they acclimate and get their act together, they can start getting out on these rivers and start assessing the biology.
Like right now, it's the dead of winter. We're not going to be out doing any kind of assessments right now. One, fish are pretty dormant. It's too cold. Really, in all honesty, we kind of need to make sure that the water quality and the streams are safe.
You need about 6 months for things to kind of normalize out a little bit. As you've learned
on the coast, you kind of have to let it go for a little while before you get back in the streams and figure that out. And And so that's what our staff will do, whether it be looking at trout or looking at smallmouth or whatever the animal is in the aquatic world. And it's true in the terrestrial world too. We got terrestrial biologists that will be, looking at bats and looking at bears and, looking at deer and all that kind of stuff. So there will be a conscientious effort to study, what effect the storm has had on our animal populations across the region. And then if there's something we can do to help, we will implement that. But we got to figure out what's happened first, and that's just going to take some time. And hopefully the public will be patient with us as we're learning, because like I said, we only have but so many staff, and it's a big area that has been affected. It's a lot of streams. It's one thing for Ben's group to go down to the coast and, okay, we're going to go study the noose. Okay, well, that's great. Ben can study the noose. He can hit maybe, your staff can hit maybe 20, 30 places and get a general idea
right.
of the noose of about where it's at. Well, if you just look at like brook trout populations,
oh yeah,
there's hundreds of them.
We've spent years mapping it
out and documenting it. And so there's a population on this side of the ridge and a population on that side of the ridge are two totally different populations. And so it's going to take time to get down into each valley and each holler and each stream, to really understand what's happened to all these individual populations. And it's just going to take some time.
That was definitely one of the things I saw when I went up there to try to help save the trout at the hatchery.
Which you did a fine job, by the way.
Which I got a speech about that in its own right. But it was interesting to me that, 2 hills over, one creek looked like nothing had changed. Yeah. And 2 hills in the other direction, it looked significant, like everything had changed.
Yeah.
And so what you may find as you're out and about in the mountains, there may be some drainages that probably caught less water during this storm that were affected less. And there's some drainages that caught more water that were affected significantly. And so that's what our guys will be out there doing too, is documenting where the major impacts were.
Yeah, I think a couple of take homes for me from the storm, from what I've witnessed via the storm. One, it's unlike anything we have witnessed in our lifetimes when it comes to storm damage. That's the first thing. 2, I agree. There's places where it seems almost selective. Like the damage is just so weird. I think of, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I think of our hatchery at Armstrong, which is a trout hatchery, and we'll talk about them in a little while. But Armstrong Creek basically comes out of the ridge that makes the Continental Divide and comes down through east into the Catawba Basin. And as you're going to the hatchery, Armstrong Creek is down in the bottom of the valley. Like you're riding on a road and you're maybe, 70, 80 feet up in the air on the road, and the creek's down, and eventually the creek and the road meet will be at the same level. But as you're going down through that valley, if you look to the left, like if you're going upstream and look at the hillside that's on the left-hand side of the stream, it's I think it's it might be national forest, it might be state forest. I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but it's a protected forest. It's untouched. I don't think there was a tree damaged on that hillside, on the other side and that held true for 5 miles. You did not see a single tree damage, not a single tree blown over from the top of the ridge all the way down to the river bottom. Not a tree. But if you look to the right side, from the bottom of the valley to the top of the ridge, there was almost not a tree standing.
Wow. Like
it was that dramatic a difference just in that valley alone. Like the wind damage on that side of the hill was, it obliterated the forest. There was a few trees standing, but you looked up the hill and it was like, I'd say 90% of the trees were gone. And to the point that the road that used to lead into the hatchery was completely shaded. That road is completely in the sun now. There's no tree standing on that ridge. And so it was it's such a weird dynamic. Like in the coastal plain, when there's tree damage, it's kind of everywhere. If the wind came through here, everybody got the wind. There's very little protection. But it seemed like, depending on what side of the hill
you may have been protected.
You may have been protected more than the other. And I mean, there's whole hillsides in the mountains right now, and people listening from the mountains can say, amen. It looks like the wind came from the top of the mountain and blew all the way down to the valley, and it just laid them like toothpicks. They're all laid over. Every tree's laid over in perfect order. Now, that's not what was occurring at Armstrong. It looked like it was swirling. They were ripped off and ripped out of the ground, but there's a lot of places where it just looked like the wind was so tremendous it just blew them all straight down the valley.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not something we're used to seeing in the coastal plain.
No.
And it was just so selective. And so it's all in where you are. You know, there's parts of the mountains that are perfectly fine today. Didn't have damage. You go to the southwest corner of the state, they didn't have the damage that, you know, the middle, central, and kind of northwestern corner mountains did. And so it is weird. The other thing I'll add to that is a lot of people ask, well, you know, the stream looks totally different, and the answer to that is yes. It in some places it has jumped its banks. It has created a new channel, which is a natural process, by the way.
Just accelerated in this point.
It's just accelerated, but it's still a natural process where it cuts a new path. Water always finds the path of least resistance. It'll cut a new path. One of the things you'll notice if you go to the mountains right now is that the streams are devoid of any real vegetation along the banks, what we would call riparian vegetation.
That's a $3 word right there.
That's a $3 word.
It just means plants on the bank.
Pretty much.
Smaller plants.
Smaller plants on the bank. But what you were so used to going up in the mountains was a very shaded stream,
Mm-hmm.
trees right on the bank, trees right up against you, you know, that kind of thing. And now what you'll see is a lot of bedrock, a lot of sediment up in the floodplain, like a lot of mud has moved out of the river channel and out on the floodplain area. So you got a lot of this fine silty material.
And the creeks are clean gravel.
And the creeks for the most part are probably, except for in some spots, you know.
Well, a lot more of it.
There's a lot more clean gravel, you know, boulders shining, that kind of stuff that you didn't see before. And the places that aren't like that in the river are kind of the flat, shallow places where the sediment deposited itself somewhere in the river.
Mm-hmm.
It's its sandy, silty bottom kind of thing. But a lot of that sediment's been pushed out. And it's going to take time. I mean,
sure.
A year from now, in fact, this spring, plants will start growing on that bank that looks eroded and terrible and everything else. You'll start getting green plants on that bank. But it'll probably be small plants like grasses and stuff like
mm-hmm.
that. And then a year from now, there'll be another round of different
shrubbery.
Plants. Shrubbery that it's just like the animals kind of replace themselves and get a restart. The plants are going to do the exact same
mm-hmm.
thing. And 10, 15, 20 years from now, you'll have trees on it that are pretty well established trees at that point. You know, as long as it stays unaltered and doesn't have another flood event, you know, come
right.
through. But, you know, this isn't the first flood that's happened in the mountains of this magnitude. It's the first flood we've witnessed, but it's not the first flood. And so those streams have done this before. And so, you know, it's just a replacement cycle, and it just takes time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're talking about, you know, a 10-year-old fish population or a 10-year-old tree.
Yeah.
It's going to take about 10 years old to make one, you know. So, I mean, and it sounds tongue-in-cheek, but you really have to think that way. This is a long-term process.
Oh, it's a long-term.
You know?
I mean, right now it looks terrible. I mean, I'll be the first to admit it looks like, well, this has altered the world.
And there are things we can do, but there's some things we just can't speed up, you know.
Yeah.
And growing trees,
natural process.
growing 10-year-old fish is one of those things.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing I would talk, you know, switching gears away from animals, is we've gotten a lot of questions about our facilities and
mm-hmm.
about our staff and that kind of stuff across the region, and I can speak to fish division facilities for sure, but generally all our staff did well. Some of our staff did receive damage to their homes, you know, and they're working through that, just like a lot of people received damage to their homes in the mountains. But you know, all our staff, as far as I know, survived the storm, which is a great blessing. And you know, we did receive significant damage in places because we are near water. You know, a lot of our facilities are located in and around those streams, whether it be public fishing access areas, boating access areas. I think of our game lands and the streams that go through our game lands. A lot of our game land, like culverts and roads and that kind of stuff, got damaged. And, we're in the process of assessing a lot of that stuff and trying to fix a lot of that stuff as time goes on. I would ask the public to just, if you got questions, contact, local biologist or contact a local lands and water access person or something of that nature.
You email us.
You can email us. That's right, at Two Bald Biologists at ncwildlife.org. We will do our best to find out for you, but just have a measure of patience with us because it is widespread. And once again, we don't have a ton of employees up there to kind of go through it all. And we're moving people out the coast into the mountains to help. We've done a lot of that kind of work already, and that will continue over at least the next year, if not longer, to get it all back in place. It's going to take some time because it is infrastructure, just like the roads and everything else there in the mountains. It's just going to take time. From an inland fisheries perspective, our most significant damage was at Armstrong. So Armstrong is a fish hatchery that grows trout. It is on Armstrong Creek in McDowell County. It literally is right where McDowell and Mitchell kind of come together. It's kind of high up in the watershed. It's one of the great things about Armstrong is that it's a fairly protected watershed, and which means it's great for growing trout. We don't have to worry about diseases and that kind of stuff generally.
Good clean water.
Good clean water, and so that and Armstrong's been there for a long time, probably prior to the 50s, at least the 50s, but probably prior to the 50s. And they received significant flooding. They had a couple of landslides that occurred at the facility, but the flooding was the worst part of it. The Armstrong Creek jumped its banks and came over into the raceways. We lost all our trout there. We had close to 600,000 trout on the facility. Those trout were from catchable size all the way down to fingerlings. So I don't know how many pounds of trout it equaled out to be, but it was 600,000 individuals. Some of those probably escaped. In fact, I know some of them did escape. A lot of them died. What happened was the water basically caused significant erosion and damage to our roadways, which has our irrigation pipes. I won't call them irrigation pipes, but it's the pipes that bring the water into the facility. Mm-hmm. Those pipes got busted and washed down the river, and when those pipes went out, we don't have any fresh water coming into the system, and the fish died. And so we lost probably, I'm spitballing, but we probably lost probably close to 2 miles worth of roadway that's just gone. I mean, that will have to be completely rebuilt. We lost all the pipes and all the electrical and all that kind of stuff that was underneath those roads. Those are gone as well. And so it will take some time to get Armstrong back up and running. Armstrong provides probably roughly 30 to 40% of our trout for our public mountain trout water program. And so it is a significant loss to our trout water program. And so we're working with engineers right now on design to get everything back up and running. Our hope is that Armstrong a year from now, so maybe January of 26, will be back up at full steam and back up and running. And whenever we get Armstrong back up and running, we will switch gears and renovate, which we had talked about before. We'll renovate Setzer. But as for now, we will keep Setzer up and running until Armstrong's back up and running.
Right. So I went to Setzer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I talked to Corey. I forget what I was doing. I was probably fishing. I don't watch the news. I was probably fishing. I don't watch the news. I text Corey and he's like, I got so much going on right now that,
It was a whirlwind for me.
The storm really messed up. Armstrong, we're just trying to get up with people. And I was like, okay, well, whatever you need us to do, let us know. My staff had already texted me about the same time saying, just tell us what day we're leaving, and we went to Setzer and tried to get Setzer sustaining. You know, they didn't have power. The guys there were exhausted, so we went to go help them out. What I learned, aside from just helping them get over that initial pulse of flood, the trout program, I mean, I got a good snootful of it.
You got a good dose.
Literally a snootful of it in some instances.
More than you wanted, probably.
But I got a real good taste of trout culture, of what it's like for these guys that live on the hatchery, what they're dealing with, how significant our hatcheries are to the trout program.
Yeah.
And I got a whole new, aside from just being able to help them go over the storm, what I realized, just being a coastal guy and not being exposed to it as much, was, you know, our hatcheries are incredibly important. And when you think about the value of our trout fisheries and the fact that most of these, well, not most, but a lot of our, if you go catch a trout, a lot of them are stock trout. So,
yes.
You know, it's significant. And you're standing there and you're saying, this is all of them, you know. And so, like, I joked about Florence, because I went through Florence in New Bern, and I joked that, like, no one ever asked
I remember that.
If there was a fish biologist.
Yeah, I remember that comment.
You realize how important you are after a big storm, because if no one needs you, you might not be as important as you thought you were. You know, but they needed painters and house builders and architects. But this go round, Corey's like, I need a fish biologist. So the script was flipped a little bit on that one.
Yeah,
so.
and I'll tell you, you know, some people this will make them mad. It just goes to show the significance of our public mountain trout water program. So that storm happened on a Friday, because I was in the mountains Sunday through Thursday. I left Thursday before the storm. I left my friends in Mitchell County because I knew it was going to be probably pretty bad. And I got home and the storm hit on Friday. Armstrong hatchery staff texted me on Friday. They were somewhat in a panic, and they should have been. It was massive flooding going on. Their neighbor had been hurt. The neighbor's house had been destroyed by a landslide. There was a lot going on in a pretty short order period of time. And then my job became find out if everybody's okay. And so that meant calling basically all the fish staff that are in the mountains, and that's roughly,
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's roughly 30 people when you get down to hatcheries and everything. It's 30, 35 people. It's a lot for us. And communication was terrible. It took me 5 or 6 days to find everybody to see if they were safe. But in the meantime, on Monday morning, I'm sitting in my office in Raleigh, and the phone rings. It's like 7:45. And it was somebody that wanted to know when we were stocking delayed harvest waters.
Sure. Oh, yeah. The podcast got emails. Yeah. What's going on? And I said, I'm heading that way. I'll be able to tell you more in a week.
Yeah.
You know?
And by the time Monday was over, between our director's office, our inland fisheries office, mountain folks, even though they didn't have those phones working, even though they got a bunch of voicemails later, we had upwards of probably 150 folks that had contacted us asking us when we were stocking delayed harvest waters. Now, the reason for that is that there was a lot of people that had planned trips to the mountains to fish for trout and didn't realize all the damage that had gone on. There were places in the mountains that weren't damaged.
Sure.
You know, and wanted to see if the stocking was still going to happen. And they didn't know our hatcheries were down, or they didn't know any of that stuff, you know. And so I'm not blaming them, but it just goes to show you that even in the midst of a pretty significant natural disaster, there were still people craving delayed harvest stockings of trout.
The podcast got a lot of emails about trout that week.
Yeah.
I, being a coastal biologist, tried to answer them since our people were busy.
He did it well, don't worry for that.
So if you didn't get the best answer possible, just give me a little grace on that one. Yeah. We were dealing with a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot going on, but it just goes to show the importance of that trout program, of that trout stocking program, to our anglers, to people both in state and out of state. It's a huge, we've talked about it on the podcast, it's a huge economic driver. It's $1.4 billion to the state of North Carolina. And so, you know, that's billion with a B. And so that is the reason why, and people love doing it. And so, you know, people love going in mountains and having that experience. And so that's why we've delayed Setzer. because we want to have trout. We could have shut Setzer down while Armstrong was down, and then there'd been no trout, which was, in our minds, was not a good thing to do, because we need to have
some trout is better than no trout.
Well, true, but can we go a couple of years without trout? In my mind, we couldn't,
right?
Because one, it is a huge economic boost to a region that will need it.
Sure.
In the not so distant future, when they get back on their feet and they start trying to bring tourists back into that area, they're going to need that kind of stuff. And so I didn't feel like, or we as an agency didn't feel like, shutting trout down completely was the right thing to do. So that's why we kept Setzer open and didn't shut Setzer, because Setzer was supposed to shut down right now.
And I've been to Setzer, and it could use a little work.
It's old. But the good thing about all this is, I say good thing. What will be good when we come out on the other side of it is we will be more resilient from flooding, both at Armstrong and at Setzer. Not saying that we won't ever get. I don't know that you can prevent the kind of flooding damage that we had at Armstrong. I don't know that there's a prevention there, because it just is what it is. But there are things that will make us more resilient in the future for the trout program, and so Setzer definitely, when it gets rebuilt, will be more resilient to flooding, because we're putting in things in place that will keep it from hopefully being flooded like it was in the past when Tropical Storm Fred came through. And so it's part of the business, because in order to grow trout, you got to be right beside a body of water that flows. If you don't want to grow trout, if you don't want to do that, then don't grow trout. That's basically the answer to that. You can't grow trout in a pond, or at least I don't think you can. At least not intensively.
Not the way we're doing it.
Not the way we're doing it, which is trying to produce as many fish as we can for the public. It's very, very difficult to do, and so we need to be beside a stream. And so it's inherently got a risk involved when it comes to flooding. And so what we're trying to do is build our facilities where they're more resilient, and we're trying to build in some redundancies where we're thinking about looking at other facilities maybe, to have more trout facilities. And that's not necessarily to grow more trout. It's to, okay, if this one goes down, we know we got fish over here. The chances of 3 or 4 facilities going down all at once is probably not going to happen. So if we have more than 2, because currently right now we have 2, maybe we can withstand, another flood event if that were to happen in the future.
Yeah, and I think the take-home message is yes. And I'm just talking about the natural resources side of things. Because there are going to be some spots that are never going to be the same, Yeah. But in a few years from now, there will be plenty of places to trout fish. There'll be plenty of places to catch smallmouth bass. These systems are going to bounce back. It's going to take a little bit of time. You're going to have a little patience and understanding of the process in the meantime, but we're going to get back to some sort of baseline probably a lot quicker than we even think. So.
Yeah. And, for those listening, we probably didn't answer every question today when it comes to response of hurricanes, and there's some things we don't know yet.
Especially if you're wondering about a specific creek, a lot of that stuff we still haven't figured out.
And so my statement would be, if you got questions, by all means, email us, twobaldbiologists@ncwildlife.org. We will either answer it ourselves, or we will get it to the people that we think know that answer. Some of it may still be unknown, as I mentioned, but obviously there's a lot of questions out there that the public have, and we want to provide the information directly to you. What I've learned a lot in this hurricane is there's a lot of things that just kind of swirl around. A lot of information that's not necessarily true kind of swirls around on social media and that kind of stuff. Get it from the horse's mouth. Call us. We're going to give you everything that we know, and we're going to share with you everything we know. We're not going to hide anything from you. We're going to tell you everything we know about the stream, and that we're working on it, and we'll figure it out as time goes on. Is it time for questions?
Let's talk about some questions.
Sounds good.
Again, we've had a bunch of questions about trout, so I avoided them in this go round. So we talked about trout for 45 minutes. So Mr. Purcell wants to crappie fish, and he lives in Moore County. What are some relatively close to home crappie fishing ideas? There's a lot of small stuff like local mill ponds and things like that I know.
The problem is he just lives in a tough place for fishing. I just be honest with you. The sand hills are difficult.
Can be.
They can be. I mean, it's not that it's horrible, but particularly for crappie.
As far as like reservoir crappie, he's got a little run to go.
Yeah, reservoir crappie, he's going to struggle. Depending on what part of Moore County he lives in, his closest like larger reservoir places to fish would be Jordan, Harris. Or if he lives on the other side of the county, it would be more of the Yadkin PD chain.
Right.
But, there's a lot of sandhills lakes. There's a lot of sandhills lakes in and around Moore County, and they're just little. You got to find them. They're little dots on a map.
Oh yeah.
They're not huge by any stretch. They're basically big ponds.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe you run across one that has got good crappie population, but in general, you don't.
Mm-hmm. And some of those lakes have overpopulated crappie populations. So
that's what I mean by they don't have.
You might get numbers, but you may not get biggies.
Yeah, they might all be 5 inches long. So that's the problem with crappie in the sand. Well, that's the problem with fish in general in the sand hills. Is one, they're low productivity, they're high flow through systems, meaning that they don't hold nutrients very long. Generally, the fish there, unless they're being fed, there's a couple of places I can think of where people feed them and they actually do pretty well. But unless they're being fed, they generally don't get really big. It's generally a sunfish, largemouth, pickerel kind of place. Some bowfin, but crappie, just not. Moore County is just not the place I'd tell them to go. Now, there's probably somebody going, he's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Oh, well, there's definitely a few mill ponds and beaver ponds that have some hidden, but you're gonna have to experiment and look.
I mean, I can't tell you exactly what that mill pond is or that Sandhills pond is, but that's just generally what Sandhills are, and those are the closer, larger reservoirs that he could go to.
Right. Okay. The next one, slot limits. One of the most interesting conversations you can have with a fisherman. How are slot limits determined, and what are their outcomes?
Ooh.
This came from Mr. Glazer. Wow. Specifically, he was talking about Carr Lake striped bass, which that's a Virginia thing, but we can talk about slot limits in general.
Sure.
First thing about slot limits, I'm gonna say while Corey's organizing his thoughts.
I'm not gonna organize them, but go ahead.
Is one, a slot limit only works where there's harvest. There has to be harvest.
That's true of every rule. Period.
Yeah. But also,
there's a minimum size limit. You got to harvest.
The main thing about limits in general, for them to have the desired impact and the desired benefit, is it has to force me as an angler to release a fish that if that rule was not in place,
that I would normally keep.
And I think that's the important thing, just to kind of elementally, rules are made to manage human harvest, and so that's the most important thing about that is we want, so when you can harvest fish in a certain size range is one, you're trying to let them grow up to be at least a certain size.
Yep.
Harvest in a window, but then protect them when they're in a larger size. Yep. So sometimes that's because there's too much exploitation on the larger fish, and so you want to be forced to turn those fish loose. It could be for reproductive reasons, which is not the case in a reservoir striped bass population necessarily, but it could be because there's a concern that those larger fish may be being overexploited, so we want to reduce the amount of harvest on them.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I think the reason, talking with Dan Michelson up there in Virginia, particularly about Carr and stripers there, one, anglers wanted that rule, so some of it is social. Two, they are trying to get sizes up, get bigger sizes in the population, get bigger fish in the population, and so they're trying to protect that kind of middle the low 20s, kind of group is what they're trying to protect. Get more of them in the population. You said it well. It really comes down to, am I making an angler do something that they wouldn't normally do?
And
am I making them release a fish?
When you say it that way, there may be some guys may hear it wrong, but what I really mean is,
well, you're trying to protect that size,
right?
For example, Harris, up until right now, Harris on largemouth had a 16 to 20. You could not keep a fish between 16 and 20. You keep five fish a day, but you couldn't keep anything between 16 and 20. And, so what they were trying to do was they were trying to protect that 16 to 20 inch fish, because generally that 16 to 20 inch fish is somewhere between 3 and 5 pounds. Generally are the ones that do a significant amount of spawning in the lake. And that was the purpose for that rule. Well, over time, here's what happens is that largemouth bass anglers don't harvest fish, or in general don't harvest fish. It's very low.
Right.
It's generally somewhere between 3 and 10%. 10% towards the coast, 3% in the Piedmont, probably even less in the mountains. It's just not a high harvest fishery. Well, we really weren't making anglers do anything different. They were turning those fish back anyway.
Right. If the daily creel limit is 5 and you keep 0, it doesn't matter what the daily creel limit is.
Now, what we did see is, because there's a lot of tournaments that occur at Harris, is that those fish weren't being put in live wells. And so those fish were like super protected. And what happened is that they started actually stunning themselves in that 16 to 20 inch, because we were overprotecting at that point, and so we had to back off of it because it was actually hurting the population over time. But you said it well. It's really about protecting. You're protecting that fish because of a reason that you see in the population, whether it's we're not getting enough older fish in the population, so we're trying to protect those older fish, or we're trying to protect a spawning class. We know that our good spawners are, I'm making it up, 4 to 6 year olds.
Right.
So we're protecting the 4 to 6 year olds to make sure that there's enough spawners in the population not being taken out. Roanoke River striped bass is a really good example of that. You can keep a fish, well, not now, but back then you could keep a fish 18 to 22, right? But you couldn't keep anything over 22. Well, why was that? Well, the 18 to 22s are generally males, generally young males in the first two to 3 to maybe 4 years of life.
And the larger females, which we were trying to protect,
were already out of that.
We're already out of it, but those are also the fish that produce lots of eggs. Very viable eggs, et cetera, et cetera.
So that's the reason for, we've gone on and on about this, but that's the reason why you would set a slot size limit. Like
slots
and they're tricky.
I mean, they're a tricky thing. It's a very contentious issue even among biologists. There's some guys who think they never work. There's other guys who think they're the bee's knees. And I would say it's very population specific and water basin specific. There's not, if a slot worked on your lake, it does not mean that it will work somewhere else at all. And in fact, it's one of the things in fish management. It's a very unique situation.
That's right.
Mr. Patrick Cotter, who has emailed us many times over the years, and
we love it. Keep sending.
Yeah, mostly he's interested in shad and striped bass, but he's had some other questions as well. He's interested in off the grid shad fishing holes. So as soon as we talk about these, maybe they won't be off the grid anymore.
Maybe we should just not say them, because they won't be off the grid.
So, I mean, we do know, though, there's places on the Neuse, there's places on the Tar, there's places on the Roanoke that shad and the Cape Fear, basically all of our coastal rivers, there are places that the shad seem to stack up, and it's known. I mean, there were fish camps there for a reason. It's because the shad's stacked up there.
Yep.
And so they're still to this day known fishing spots,
Yeah.
And so what he's saying, and you can go on any of the social media or any of the forums, you can get a list of them real quickly. There's probably somebody out today seeing if he can catch the first shad, because they do that.
Oh yeah, there's definitely that. I want to be the first one.
So, but the one thing that has really kind of been interesting to me over the last few years as we've done some kind of experimental herring work is we've gone to some of these smaller creeks and looked and see, and you know what you'll see is a lot of these, all a shad it really wants is some water velocity and some water.
Yeah. Sometimes they want a place to hide.
Yeah, they need some eddies
and stuff. They don't want to be in float all the time.
But there's a lot of places, especially in our smaller creeks, off of the tar, off of the noose.
Yeah.
That if you go up high enough, the water starts to speed up. You start to get a little bit of gradient.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, boom, there's shad there. You know, Bryce's Creek is one of them.
Yep.
It's off the Trent. The Trent River has shad in it.
Yeah.
No one knows except a few people that live in Trenton.
Yeah.
You know, Bachelor's Creek, Spring Creek on the Noose are good ones that are low in the river. They don't really hit everybody's radar. I'm trying to think of the tar.
And they're not necessarily small creeks.
They would have to have.
They got to have enough
significant volume.
They got to have volume and flow to get them. You know, Swift Creek's another one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about the lower down Swift Creek.
Right.
Yeah, it's got to have. If you look at a map and if you look at the Noose and the creeks you just mentioned,
mm-hmm.
Right.
Those are creeks that are long.
Those are long, winding creeks that have pretty good volume of water coming down them, and that's where a shad will go to. They're not going to go to a real small ditch, or I mean, it might, but that's generally not what they're looking for. They're looking for some flow, as you mentioned,
mm-hmm.
you know, and it's almost like they got lost, you know, kind of thing. Instead of going up the river, they actually go. I don't know. Maybe they go up the creek and spawn, for all I know.
I think they do. I mean,
it makes sense that they would.
We did some genetic work a few years ago and looked at the shad migration, mainly American shad, but we looked at whether they are genetic differences among the creeks and also among time.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's all one big stock that's mixed together.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
You know, there's probably somebody doing work right now that's going to
Gonna
prove
make
that
you
wrong.
Yeah,
but they do seem to be a mixed population, so it could be that they use, you know, Chicod Creek one year and then they go to Battle Park the next. We really don't have any data to say that they don't or that they do.
Did you call it Chicod?
What do you call it?
I grew up calling it Chicod.
Well, what is it?
Somebody's going to call in and tell us which one's right.
Well, you're probably right.
I don't know. I'm just curious.
But,
maybe somebody write in and tell us.
Also, maybe Trainer's Creek would be a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Blunt's Creek.
Yep.
Could have, and even if it's even lower in the system,
Yep.
it definitely could have some fish in there using it.
Yeah, like a lot of people think that those fish go all the way up the river. You know, like all of them go all the way up the river, and that's not even true with stripers. I mean, they don't all go up the river. They find these pockets. You know, I mean, historically, the Trent River had stripers in it. You know, so it's going to have shad in it. You know,
and traditionally, it also seems like they show up in the lower creeks earlier. Yeah. And then they keep moving up and up that's and right. up. So that's the other thing to think about is where are these fish in their migration? Because it's definitely obvious. They show up in pitch kettle on the Noose,
yep.
Then they'll be in Grinnell, then they'll be in the next one up, then
yep.
they'll be in, you know, yep. then they'll be in Contentia.
Yep.
So there's this stage of, and there's guys who fish enough to know
exactly where
it's starting to taper off. I need to go to the next one up.
Yeah, I got to keep moving.
So,
cool.
But really, any of those creeks, as long as there's a little bit of flow, it's on the radar.
We didn't give it all away.
You got to do a little bit of. It's got to be fishing at some level.
Yeah, we didn't
so the good news is it's shad fishing. So you can share some shad information. You might not want to tell people where your big bass spot is, but shad fishing is a community.
It is a community-oriented fishing for sure. Yeah. Well, good. So who's our winner this month?
Patrick is going to be our winner.
Oh, good. Good for Patrick.
So we'll send him a goodie bag, a box.
Excellent. So, as always, if you got questions, email us at twobaldbiologists@ncwildlife.org. We will continue to have the video, I think, and hopefully that's going to work out pretty well. I'm pretty excited about that. Things might change in how it looks and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it will once we figure out how to work this thing.
Yeah, this is all, we're in the baby steps at this point. You know, we're fish biologists, people. Give us a break.
That's right.
But once again, we'll see you in February. Our thoughts and prayers are with those in the West that are enduring significant change in their lives, and we'll talk to y'all in February.
Take care.